Uh, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a session on closing the plastic tap solutions for marine plastic pollution. This session will have three panelists who will make a short presentation on some of the issues that we've been addressing through our Marine Plastics and Coastal Communities project supported by the government of Sweden through SIDA. And each of them will present first, Peter, an overview of some of the issues of how we are addressing marine plastics pollution globally, and particularly focusing on some of our work with regards to the UNEP guidance on hotspots and other issues related to working using an integrated approach to address what is a complex problem. Following that, we will have a couple of videos showing you some of the actions that are going through our circular economy grants program that's in the field, to give you a sense of how that actually plays out in reality. And to complement that work, you are going to be listening or hearing experiences of some of our partners who have been supporting us in this venture, particularly in terms of capturing some of that learning in terms of monitoring, evaluation, and action.
Can you try this microphone?
Can you hear me now? So you didn't hear me before? Okay, so I do apologize for that slight technical hiccup. To sort of reiterate again, we will first present an overview of some of the work we've been doing under our Close the Plastic Tap, followed by some of our partners who've been supporting us, particularly in relation to understand how we capture that learning and demonstrate change and impact, and some of the challenges that we have faced as a result of that process. And then also finally to discuss and talk about really where do we go from here, because really it requires impact investments, and some of those issues will be sort of covered in our next session. And finally, we will open the session to some questions and answers, should you have some for the panelists, and I will also have a panel discussion with our group. So with that, I would like to invite our first speaker, Peter Manyara, from IUCN's Eastern and Southern Africa region. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janaka. Can you all hear me? Sure, thank you. So I'll be taking you through a presentation on IUCN's approach to closing the plastic tap. And just to clarify, I think for many people, whenever they see closing the plastic tap, they think like, oh, we want to stop using plastic. But that's not really the case. What we want to stop is the tap that leaks plastic to the different waterways we have globally and into the marine environment. So our initiative is largely funded by SIDA, though we have other donors like NORAD, like the AFD, who fund different activities across the globe. So our programmatic approach involves 4 pillars: knowledge, capacity, policy, and business engagement. So across the 4 pillars, I think one of the most important things for us that we do is bringing on board different stakeholders, different partners, to co-develop methodologies, to co-develop data sets that are relevant to the various countries where we work, but also to engage along like prioritizing different types of interventions and measures that we can take within different contexts of the countries we work, because some of them are fairly maybe wealthy, some are a bit more poor, so their economic powers and social disparities are quite significant. And then we move into action, where we try to, as Janaka pointed out, demonstrate certain actions that we can actually take locally that are inexpensive, but have transformative impact, not just to the marine environment, but also to the communities that are bound in those particular areas. So IUCN's Close the Plastic Tap is a program that was conceived about 2 years ago, but it's building upon about 5 years of work that IUCN has been doing on plastics in various countries. So this is the website for the program. If you just search IUCN Close the Plastic Tap program, you'll be able to go to this website. And our overall aim is really to have governments, industry, and society equipped with the necessary knowledge, capacities, policy actions, and plans of action to contain and reduce marine plastic pollution. And then in terms of our geographical scope, as you can see from the map, we work in far and wide areas, from Africa to Southeast Asia. But then we also work in the Caribbean and Pacific Islands. So currently we have projects running maybe in about more than 10 to 15 countries. So what we start with, as I mentioned, we basically start by understanding the problem context and bringing the various countries on board in terms of having a shared vision of what the problem is and the dynamics around the problem in terms of like plastic flows and what are the major leakage points, and then go into interventions and measures that could be deployed to address that. So we've been learning a lot on various methodologies that are out there. And so based on the gaps that we identified in currently existing methodologies, a lot of them don't account for plastic leakage into the marine environment. A lot of the current environmental footprinting methodology, LCA methodologies, account for leakages within the terrestrial environments. So our partnership with UNEP and through its life cycle initiative, Environmental Action, which is a European-based eco-design consultancy, and Quantis, which, as you all know, is a large sustainability consultancy that works globally. We developed this methodology to basically help us to account more for plastic leakages into the oceans, yeah, and just go beyond that and prioritize a certain set of interventions that are more significant in responding to the hotspots that are identified. So as Janaka pointed out in the morning, for those who are in the presentation before this, we start with a material flow analysis. So basically in each country trying to understand the major inputs of plastics, either as virgin or primary products, but also the importation of waste. But I'd say here the African countries bring in very insignificant amounts in terms of plastic waste because of the absence of processing capacities for waste from different countries. And then on the output side, we see that we try to account for what goes into stock. So by stock, we mean like long-term closures of plastic where it's held for many years. So PVC, for example, that goes into like such pipes or in buildings, we don't account that in our leakage computations. But then what goes into society as, for example, products, carrier bags, bottles, and all that, these are short-lived products. So those are the ones we try to account for on where they end up and how they contribute to leakage. So this is an example of plastic leakage in South Africa, where you see, compared to other African countries, South Africa has a significant recycling capacity at 352 tons. But beyond that, you see that all they collect, still the bulk of it goes to a significant chunk, about 1 million tons of it goes to improperly disposed or remains uncollected in the suburbs, which is significant. And so from that, we go into computing leakage into waterways and the ocean. So for South Africa, for example, there's about 107 tons leaking into the oceans every year. And this is based on 2018 data. So if you were to do an iteration of this process this year, I bet this could even increase 4 times, because most municipalities are recording significant increases, almost tripling or quadrupling of the plastic component of waste, mostly because of PPEs, a lot of plastic packaging for food safety and hygiene. And then, yeah, this was also presented in the morning, where we can create this picture of what different countries leak. And as you can see, it's highly dependent on the Human Development Index of the various countries and the socioeconomic context. So South Africa being the highest, with a relatively high per capita leakage rate per year at 1.9, compared to other countries which at least are below the global average. And so the typical context within the African context is what you're seeing on the screen. Even where they try to put like skips for collecting garbage and different types of waste, the recovery of these garbage is quite poor. So it's a broken regime. So a lot of them usually overflow, like what you're seeing on the screen. And so they are always flown around by wind and other parameters. And then when it comes to landfill sites, I'd say about more than 95% of Africa doesn't have sanitary landfills. what you see in a lot of European countries where when waste goes to the landfills, there is compaction of the waste so that it's contained within the landfill. So what we have is the image you see on the right where they just dump it there and a lot of it is always blown away. So for miles beyond any landfill site in Africa, you always see a lot of like plastic just being thrown around. And then the other thing, we have people living in landfill sites and they're always involved in daily recovery of materials. It's illegal in most countries, but then there's little you can do when these people are trying to do this to sell plastics, to take their kids to school and to earn a livelihood. So beyond the hotspotting, we use those results to try prioritize what are some of the most significant interventions that could be done to address the problem. And we look at the ones which have very minimal unintended negative consequences, but present very high potential for leakage mitigation. And then on the policy front, because you can't just do the technicalities of things, you have to look at the various policies of countries. We're doing a number of studies, and I'll point to one, which you see here, which is a very interesting study that we've done in Drakenstein municipality in Cape Town, where the approach in Africa when it comes to illegal dump sites is for municipalities to clamp down on communities that dump illegally at a certain site. But then what we are saying here is, since illegal dump sites crop up in thousands across Africa every day, the best thing to do is, if we have this community of like 2,000, 3,000 people dumping here at a regular spot, instead of criminalizing them, why don't you formalize this dump site, actually introduce some safety measures to contain the waste, introduce some management regime composed of like local leaders, and then have communities dump there, but in a more safe manner, because always kids play in these dump sites, like recovering toys and all that. So it's an interesting study that we hope could help municipalities and governments change how they think about illegal dump sites. And then in terms of circular action, we try to put in some grant funding to support initiatives on the ground that are really geared towards like catalyzing their creativity and innovation to present as alternatives to the current models of plastic use in society. So the initiatives you see here, I won't talk so much about them. You can go to our website to see more about them. But I'll just highlight maybe one from Tanzania, which converts plastic waste into poles and other construction materials, but also importantly, get waste from poor families or households, and then they partner with health insurance companies to give these families health insurance. So instead of these families paying money, which they don't have, they pay through their waste. Yeah. So this is 2 days ago, where the head of this organization reported that they had a meeting with the Minister of Environment, and he agreed to replace a project to fence the compound with metal poles, but instead use these plastic waste made poles. Yeah. Which is good for them because these ones don't rust, and then they don't incorporate any chemicals in the processing of these. So it's an exciting initiative, and it so happened that an assistant was just on Instagram and saw this thing about these posts and was like, let's reach out to these guys. And I think this is the power that we have in Africa, where from Kenya to Cape Town, from Somali to Ghana, a lot of young people, age 20s to 30s, are coming up with very interesting innovations around alternatives to plastics, more than what you see, for example, in European countries. And so when it comes to policy and economic reforms, there's really no one size fits all. It's different contexts in different countries. But I think what is most important is for our countries to explore policies that advocate for reduction, because prevention is the best and most cost-effective approach for developing countries, but also that promote alternatives to plastic. And then policies that at least provide some level of lag time. A lot of the policy making sometimes has been drastic, so introducing shocks to the system, and then stakeholders are not on board, people are not happy, and then the reaction from societies sometimes tends to be negative. So I think incorporating some lag time around policies, and not so much of emphasizing recycling, because recycling is so much a downstream solution. And as we saw from Breaking the Plastic Wave study that was done by Pew and Systemic and released about 2 years ago, recycling will only account for about 20% by 2040 in terms of plastic leakage reduction. So the issue of substitution and production reduction, I think, are very key, and they're cost effective. So definitely the power that we have here of like encouraging your countries to really clamp down on a lot of importation of plastics that we know cannot be recycled, and African countries don't have the capacity to recycle. I think that's something very powerful to pursue. So I leave you with a few like recommendations around recycling, around, for example, reducing importation or production of plastics that really we can't recycle in our countries. And the issue of tools, capacities, and knowledge development, especially with municipalities. Then littering and open burning is really a straightforward thing which we can reduce. We don't need money to do this thing. And then value of after-use plastics. As somebody has already said many times, the value of plastics is so cheap because it doesn't account for a lot of externalities, and especially in the long term. Then funding to scale measures. So at the community level, we can provide funds to scale some of these measures that communities are already doing and scale them and do them in a big way. So with that, thank you very much, Janaka, and back to you.
Thank you, Peter, for that very succinct overview of some of the work we're doing in Eastern and Southern Africa, which actually is also being implemented in Southeast Asia as well, in Thailand and Vietnam. Unfortunately, our colleagues from the region weren't able to join us here today. But what we would like to do in this interim period is just quickly share with you some of the actions that have been going on the ground with the support of IUCN. So we have 3 short videos that I'm going to share with you to give you a sense of some of the practical issues that are being addressed from the African and East African region.
Watoma Marine Association started this project 10 years ago as a beach cleanup initiative. We then worked together with the local community groups and the local hotels industry to create a dynamic plastic recycling value chain. And how we did that, how we achieved that, was by the hotels sponsoring the beach cleaners and at the same time providing freely their plastic waste for recycling. So this was the beginning of a real circular economy enterprise.
Since 3R was founded in 2014, our idea, our wish was to transform the sector, right? To make the sector more sustainable. But when you talk about transforming a sector, you need regulation. You need a framework to support that. Since 2014, 3R has been working with the Ministry of Land and Environment on regulations that could strengthen this sector. The main achievement of this period was the approval of the EPR regulation in December 2017.
The Blueprint project actually started in 2019 with the ultimate goal of progressively cleaning up the Durban port. So the Durban port is currently a highly degraded. The Blueprint project actually started in 2019 with the ultimate goal of progressively cleaning up the Durban port. So the Durban port is currently a highly degraded system, but it's also a very important system in estuary. And so our goal was to clean up this historical buildup of waste over the number of years that had been building up in the different systems of the port. We did this through the employment of over 50 youth that lived around the area that actively cleaned up the waste every day. And our goal was to get that historical buildup out so that we could start monitoring and tracking the waste that comes in every day.
I hope you got a sense of some of the actions that are actually taking place at the ground level in some of our work within IUCN. My next guest is going to be Alexis Groskopf, and I do apologize for my pronunciation once again. And he's actually going to build on maybe some of the items that Peter talked about, innovation and action, and how do we move forward from where we are. So Alexis, with that, I would like to invite you forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Janaka. Hi everyone, my name is Alexei Groskopf, indeed. I'm French, but I live in South Africa. I run a startup incubator based in Cape Town, but we operate pan-Africa. And thanks to COVID-19, we had to pivot online, and now we're operating pan-African, and we're working with the IUCN on rolling out the Circular Plastic Economy Innovation Lab. Can we put up this? I have to do something, all right? I'll let you do a presentation. What is that? Awesome. Thanks. I'll actually speak more to what is on the slide now. And to echo what Peter was saying earlier and the videos were saying just now, we do need to cut the tap. It's important. Policies can help to do that. You can always try to scoop out what's overflowing. If you don't cut the tap, you'll never get to solving the issue. That being said, if we don't create a value chain around the plastic that's already out there, the plastic is going to outlive us, right? So we need to find something that makes us deal with the plastic that's already out there. So the two options, obviously, is stopping the virgin plastic entering the economy and the systems and scoop out what's already out there. What circular economy does is the two of them. It combines the two, hence the opportunity, right? New material gets in, then you have manufacture, distribution. It starts with reuse, repair, repurpose, and the collection and recycling for whatever is not reused, repaired, and repurposed. And this is the beauty of the circular economy, blending the two options by leveraging the system, the very system that caused the problem. Today, the problem stems from the fact that what is defined as progress is economic value. Whatever derives economic value is something that is progress, which is wrong, right? More and more we encompassing the notion of social benefits and environmental impact, which is a good thing. And circular economy leverages this to create a new value chain, which in essence is using the perverted system to grow on a positive impact. If that makes sense. Happy to answer questions. I see a lot of weird faces, so I'll answer questions if there are any questions later on. But essentially creating value, economic value, on something that has a positive impact will grow naturally in the system that we have today. The other thing is that it allows for transition. If we stop the production of plastic from one day to the next, it's not going to have a positive social impact. It's going to have a positive environmental impact potentially, but economically and socially, not necessarily. The system in place benefits some people today, right? If you shift things too quickly, those people benefiting from this system and the status quo will obviously now not be benefiting anymore. So there needs to be a smooth transition to ensure the social inclusivity of the transition. Circular economy enables this. Now in Africa, Africa has been actually ahead of the curve. The first country in the world to ban single-use plastic is Eritrea in 2005, and more countries followed. And the strictest ban today is in Kenya, and it was enforced to the level that it is today in 2017. But policies, although very important, I agree with you, Peter, aren't enough. There needs to be a holistic approach. And that's why IUCN is also working to build entrepreneurship capacity. Because the driver of change that the governments are creating aren't sufficient to implement the change. There needs to be government, businesses, and people, or communities. And today, the lack of capacity in Africa is preventing the scaling, the growth of the actual implementation of the problems. And that's why the Circular Plastic Economy Innovation Lab was created with the support of Mar Plastic at the IUCN and the Swedish agency SIDA. So what it is, now you know why we have to do it, but what is it? It's an incubation program that helps with product and business development of African-based entrepreneurship that will work in the circular plastic economy. The idea is to help them, to gear them up with the tools, the network that is required for them to grow on their own. So by injecting a small-ish grant of 10,000 USDs, thanks to SIDA and Mar Plastic, we're hoping to be able to leverage this to grow the business, leveraging the economic power, leveraging the system that exists today that grows whatever derives economic value, to grow those businesses and thereby their impact. We're doing this over a short period of 4 months, 4 startups, innovative enterprises into 4 different countries: South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Kenya. They're going through different trainings, individual coaching, and business mentoring. in addition to this grant funding that they're receiving. The idea is to, again, provide them with a pitch deck, business and product development strategies, a bit of comms, positioning, marketing strategies, so they can roll them out on their own account after the end of the program. And we're also making sure in the same process that impact is built in within the DNA of the company. So as they grow, they'll keep on that impact and have an IMM, impact measurement and management framework in place. And ultimately, because in this world, nothing grows without a bit of funding, we are sharpening their business acumen and putting them in the spotlight so they get a bit of networking going and find new partners, customers, and investors. In a nutshell, the 4 that we have this year are in, the first one is in Mozambique, Alma in Mozambique, which is a non-profit this time. Non-profit doesn't mean that you don't generate revenues, it's just that the benefits, the profits that you create will be reinjected into the business, right? So this one in Tofo, that is collecting waste and it has an interesting narrative of saying, all right, we want every tourist that comes to Tofo, Mozambique, which is a very touristic area, to leave with the equivalent amount of plastic that they've imported virtually, right? In reshaping that plastic that they collect into little crafts and artworks. EcoAct Tanzania, Peter, you referred to this earlier, they're creating plastic timber from reused plastic collected within underserved communities. And they have a growing business and growing interest in the rest of Africa. Greenway Africa is a completely different technology. It's digital, it's tech-enabled, and what it does is creating a platform where waste generators or pickers can connect with people that are using those bioproducts or those output as an input in their value chain. And Mazingira Yetu in Kenya are working in shifting people's mindset in underserved communities from trash to treasure of the plastic by repurposing plastic into everyday tools that they use in the underserved communities, as opposed to Alma, which is to sell those little crafts to tourists. Mazingira Yetu is building lamp posts and other stuff that are useful to the community that is actually generating the waste. These are just the example of this year. Hopefully, the ambition with the IUCN SIDA is upon this demonstrator to grow this bigger and throughout Africa over the years and perhaps throughout Asia as well as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis, for that really great introduction of how to stimulate enterprise or entrepreneurial innovation at the local level and the ground level. And that's so important really to address some of these issues in the long term, because quite often we forget that. We try to impose actions from external sources that quite often do not match the needs of what's happening locally. And my next guest, Ricardo, is going to change the focus because all of those issues are extremely important, but ultimately we have to demonstrate change. And really how you do that in the context of the kinds of issues that we address requires a slightly different approach to our traditional way of thinking. So with that, Ricardo is with Impactrack, and he's going to sort of talk about some of those issues.
Thank you, Janaka. Glad to be here. Just put up my presentation. So I'm Ricardo, I'm the founder of Impactrack, and we had the privilege to assist the projects financed through the Marplastics in their impact management. And when we think about psychoeconomy projects success, we think about an indicator which is usually kilogram of plastic waste avoided or kilogram of waste collected. But that's a very narrow understanding of all the benefits that these projects generate. And having this narrow indicator prevent us to better manage the project and ensure that we really generate all the social benefits that were mentioned by Peter and Alexis before, and prevent them also to communicate better their project and to attract new funding, new partners. So that was one question that we posed ourselves with Marplastics, how to better empower project owners, how to create something that is meaningful for the funder, but mainly for the project owner. So there are two main approaches for project. I'm sorry, I had to. Okay. Yeah. So we we know two possible approaches of monitoring and evaluation. The conventional approach, we call an expert. He comes here, he does all the job, and at the end of the project we have a nice report, and then we can see if we did wrong or if we did well. And that's very important to show and know, have lessons learned. But the approach we wanted to take, it's more on the management approach, where we have the results over the time, and with the aim to create capacity building to empower the project owner so he can adjust the project before the end of the project. And the context is always changing, mainly in developing countries. We had COVID this year, so this is more a management tool and at the same time a reporting tool. And to create that, we faced some challenges. The first challenge was that the internal team didn't have the capacity of monitoring evaluation. That's really specific. There are plenty of methodologies. You have the methodologies of Harvard, you have the methodology of Social Value International, INP, and so on and so on and so on. So how to choose a good methodology? They won't spend days and days reading methodologies and becoming an expert. They don't have too much resource, human resource. They are like small teams that do great things, but they are quite small teams. And external context is always changing, so they need to adapt that. The indicators that we define at the beginning will not, for sure, represent the results we have at the end. And to respond to these challenges, we created a solution that is composed of a training. The objective is not to train experts in impact management, but to train practitioners. So it's a very short, synthetic, on-demand training. We created a platform to guide them through the methodologies and to automate the process, so it's much less time-consuming. And we provide individual advice to help them sort out the problems where they face. And the objective of that was to have a process that is easy for the project owner, a process continuous so they can manage, and a process where they are autonomous in the whole thing to manage and communicate their impact. If we think about the outcomes of Psychoeconomy, we mentioned several beforehand, but we are always looking for the waste, the plastic waste in the ecosystem. But there are many actions that are done by the Psychoeconomy enterprise, and Stephen is here from Kenya. He knows better than anywhere. They do several things. One of the things is that they hire people, they train people, and usually in very vulnerable conditions to select, to process the plastic. And these people, thanks to the project, they are empowered, they have dignity, improve their financial situation, and it's a transformation, social transformation. The separation of the plastic, once the plastic separated, it's sold in the local economy, so it generates inflows for the local economy and for the local government as well. And all the projects, they act in improvement of the waste management policies. And this is, so in a nutshell, Psychoeconomy projects are like a machine that eats plastic and generate social, environmental, and legal benefits. So how to consider all these impacts? We had to find a simple way that's adapted to project owners to take into account that, to manage that, because always there is a dependency. If they hire more, they're able to select more plastic and generate more. If they improve the waste management policies, they will be able to recycle more and generate more benefits. So it's all them that must work together and will create more and more benefits. Regarding the ecosystem, we talked about footprint, which is a very important methodology to identify hotspots and policies. But project owners, they don't have the capacity to do that at local level. So here we saw that the ecosystem had a main service related to tourism in these projects. And instead of evaluating the state of the ecosystem, we focus on what is the impact on the ecosystem service linked to the tourism. And this was much easier to measure at the local level. So, for example, project owners could do a survey with the citizens about the perception about the pollution on the beach, and in the hotels about the perception from the feedbacks from clients about the pollution on the coast. So this is something feasible for project owners and very important. So I think we must include social science in the M&E of environmental projects as well, to show what are the links between human well-being and environment. All these projects, they faced COVID crisis, which impacted their capacity to collect waste, sometimes they were unable to sell their products because the buyer was abroad, enable them to measure, to gather data, so to run their impact measurement. And it was very interesting to notice that all of them, they had very creative responses, finding new buyers, diversifying their activities, digitalizing their activities. So in a nutshell, the main benefits of M&E are various, beginning the whole process which provide them with a shared understanding what are the objectives of the projects. So the whole team has a clear vision, understanding of what we are doing and what's our aim, to engage stakeholders in the design of the project, to keep track of the impact and to communicate that clearly, structurally to investors, and of course to improve the project and communicate it in a more persuasive way. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janica.
Thank you, Ricardo, for that overview of some of the issues with regards to actually measuring change. I'm going to ask the panelists to step up so that we can actually ask them some questions, but I would also at this point like to open the floor to any of you who might have some questions for the panelists. So if you do have
Hello to everybody. So I'm in charge of a network on sea turtle in Central Africa, and we are working also with West African and North African sea turtles. And so we are developing things. We are now trying to do something for the plastic, because the plastic is impacting strongly the turtles and their habitats. And I'm really happy to discover there is many things done in South Africa, East Africa. And my first message is, okay, we are a network of civil society and communities. We are developing things, so I think we will really benefit from your work, and I would be happy to get in contact with you all. So there is a group, a plastic group within the IUCN, is that it? So this is my question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your positive input. And I think it's definitely sensible for all the different actors in an environment where the context is complex and resource deficient to actually network and work together, each doing its own piece to get things moving. So within Africa, we have different IUCN sub-regional offices, and each of them connect several countries. So what we try to do is, through these, we bring different types of stakeholders in like regional platforms. So we have a platform, for example, in West Africa, in Eastern and Southern Africa, but it doesn't hurt always to connect to as far north as Algeria or Tunisia or Libya, because there could be very interesting and alternative ways of how they do things there. which could benefit the rest of the continent. So let's exchange cards, and then we keep in touch after here. Thank you.
Can I just add on to this? Sorry, there's a couple of things. I don't know why it's a lot easier to connect Anglophone and Lusophone Africa than it is to connect Francophone Africa with the rest of Africa. It's a fact. I can't give you an answer why. So connecting people might help, and not governments. That being said, and then Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa are very different cultures, and things don't work exactly in the same way. Hence why perhaps there's a lack of communication.
And just to add, I want to, we do also have a colleague here from Ziad from West Asia who actually covers the northern part of Africa, right? And so he's the go-to man if you're interested in that region. And we also do work in West Africa, but our work there has really just started in Senegal, but with the anticipation of growing it out. But yes, depending on, I suggest you start with Peter or myself, and we can make sure you're connected.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Menebo, Plastic Oceans International. I'm in charge of Latin America. First of all, congratulations about your work, the small-scale solutions, but in such a structured way. So really a great example for us in Latin America, how we also should be doing things. My question is, because of course you have been talking more about local and more small-scale solutions, do you find that there is an interest, an international interest, to also introduce waste to energy to take care of problems in Africa? I know from experience that is being talked about especially in Chile, where I'm from. I'm not going to give you my opinion, but I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of African countries, what is sensible is what can be achieved and with a meaningful impact from a very cost-effective angle of things. So the approach most of the countries are taking from the policy side of things and on the practical side of things operation-wise is really to advocate for more preventative measures, because we all know, for example, a lot of infrastructure that was put in place for waste treatment and disposal was put up in like the 70s and 80s. Most countries haven't added to that or even improved what is existing, so a lot of it is dilapidated. So the more you call for additional investment in modern and advanced technologies to do other things, the more difficult you're immersing a lot of these countries, like Mozambique, for example. But in South Africa and maybe a little bit of those countries where there's resources more from the private sector and others, Nigeria, for example, where the government is creating they're tweaking the enabling environment to spur private sector investment in that. There's a lot of discussion around waste to energy, like putting plants for that. So we'll see where that goes. But I'll say in the same South Africa, for example, where there's such plans, the producer responsibility organizations like PETCO, for example, a lot of the members there will be a bit skeptical because there's a fear that when you have a waste to energy plant and then you divert PET, a highly recyclable material that they are now able to convert from bottle to bottle, going into waste to energy, then you're basically getting that out of the stream and somehow weakening the whole circular economy that we're talking about here today. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. I'll add on to this. The problem in Africa, which should be the same in Latin America, or at least some part of Latin America, is the informal sector. You'll need the energy from waste is a solution, is a potential solution. It's part of a sort of greater portfolio of solutions, and they all interact and interdependent and work with one another, which is what Peter was underlying here. And to encompass something that needs to be very structured because of all the different solutions and the structure that has to be put in place in Africa needs to come into, a step-by-step approach. So if you can manage to do energy from waste in a very informal, smaller scale and informal way to start with, you can grow that into a more structured ecosystem and value chain. but then the technology and the systems that we use today to do energy from waste aren't tailored, aren't geared to grow in an African context, generally speaking. So there needs to be innovation. The solution is a good one. I mean, the objective of that solution is potentially a good one, but there needs to be a more sort of ground, bottom-up approach to this.
Good morning, everyone. I'm from Thailand Environment Institute. Just Dr. Janaka mentioned, nobody here. Okay, I would like to share the experience from my country. We have the action plan on plastic waste solution. We design the state for the management. It's like the production, the consumption, post-consumption is like the waste management, and the marine impact reduction. We tried a lot to engage the private sector in the production state. We think it is the first stage for solve the problem in the whole plastic life cycle. We set up like the name PPP Plastic, Public-Private Partnership on Plastic Management. We try a lot to engage the private management in our discussion, and I think the public, the private, the company, they feel they are afraid of the policy ban the plastic, something like that. So they join us to discussion on this matter. And right now in Thailand, we ban the single-use plastic, 7 types of them. And it's not success story, but we try to do a lot. So I would like to share about the private company to engage in this solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Nice to see you after so many years. I'm sorry. Actually, I guess that is the question to our panelists. Maybe I'll start there if there are no other questions. Is really how do you engage business? We've sort of focused on young entrepreneurs or at the small to medium sector, but there are those large practitioners, and how do we actually make sure that we're going across the scale of business as well?
I have a very short answer to that. The larger the business, the less agile. So if you need to change something in a large business, rather outsource the innovation and the disruption and integrate it slowly. And it's a good opportunity for informal sector and entrepreneurs from underserved communities to come into the game of a more formalized economy. This is how actually we've been doing with this BEL.
And then maybe just to add to that, one of the most important components for our program is to engage businesses. And on these, I'd say that one of the opportunities we have, for example, now going forward, is through the Global Plastics Treaty, because one thing business doesn't like doing is for business A to put, for example, $10 million to try introduce some transformation, while business B, who's my competitor, is not putting any money. So they just are a free rider within the system. And so what businesses across Africa have been promoting is that we must have a legislative and policy framework that is not uncertain, that's predictable, that's stable, and that at least integrates some mandatory aspects to make everybody accountable. So on this, for example, one of the initiatives that is running and rolling out across Africa and beyond is the Plastics Pact. So the South African Plastics Pact was one of the first ones in Africa. And on that, we are supporting members of that. So a lot of the businesses which participate in that are big businesses within the country and with a footprint within the African region. And so businesses like Woolworths, for those who've come to Africa, Pick n Pay, Danone, Unilever, they've really expressed, and they gave me this message to come here and say they are fully behind the Global Plastics Treaty. They're supporting it and they're endorsing it. So I think such commitment is really welcome, because for them, they need this global coordinative framework that really provides for a chance for everybody to play their role. Thank you.
I just want to add quickly, sorry about this. I just want to add quickly, governments are taking a stance which is proving to be very efficient. Education, raising awareness. So even the larger businesses, whichever the size of the business, your customers of tomorrow, your employees of tomorrow, and your managers of tomorrow will be aware of the cause. So if you want to attract the right talent and retain them, if you want to have the right customers, should it be B2C or B2B moving forward, you'll have to account for environmental impact. And that goes across the value chain, across the sizes of different enterprises moving forward. So they'd rather start shifting now, the larger ones, because they know they're usually slower to adapt. And it's proving to be very efficient. So awareness and education.
Sorry, is it working now?
Okay, just one thought about what we said about the link between the French-speaking and English-speaking, maybe inside the IUCN, because I'm a member of the sea turtle specialist group. We have a species group, the species survival committee. And when you are addressing like threats in link with our species, maybe we should communicate more between the species committee and the threats groups. So that's because we have lots of French speaking in this one, for example, but I'm sure it's the same in others. So maybe about the way to work together, it could be a good solution to better connect.
Just to very quickly add to that, as IUCN members, really, our mandate is to work with our members and our commissions.
We are really involved and we don't know you, and it's both sides. It's from me and it's from you, so we have to
exactly.
improve.
And I think that is an important take-home message for us as well, and you know, for us to maybe work with some of our species survival committees and others to bring awareness of what we are doing, because quite frankly, I think our plastics program has grown quite rapidly. We work in 5 regions, 5 IUCN regions, 13 countries, and yet...
And really happy you are here.
So we have a presence out there, which we can definitely tap to with our colleagues.
Thank you.
If there are no questions from the table, I just want to take a step. Oops. It's getting late. I want to take a step back because we've talked about circular economy, we've talked about changing innovation, but there's a huge group that seems sometimes we recognize is missing from this whole discussion, which are the informal waste sector. And sometimes these solutions can actually have a negative impact on, as some of you this was pointed out earlier, on their livelihoods and actions, you know, as a result of this change. Positive, definitely, but the social impacts are greater. Would you like to maybe provide some insight into those discussions?
Yeah, maybe to just start off, I think for us within the African context, one of the most important things that we try to strengthen is the integration of the informal sector, waste pickers, waste reclaimers, who are scattered in landfills and dump sites in the streets, into like the whole design and planning decision making of the whole system. And how we try to do that is the opportunity we have now is a number of countries are adopting extended producer responsibility, like regulations and legislative frameworks, and which within them they mandate the requirement by producer responsibility organizations, and these are producers, importers, and brand owners, to actually design EPR schemes that integrate the participation, and not just in a very like instrumental way, but in a transformative way of the informal waste pickers into these discussions. So it's a tall order. As the system is now, there's always this perception that the waste pickers and the reclaimers are illiterate, they don't understand these things. So there's still that tradition of programs, the EPR schemes being designed with the intention that then ultimately they'll be taken to the reclaimers to maybe endorse or say whether they agree on that or not. Yeah, but what we try to push for, we've done assessments through our Environmental Law Center to really delve deep into the intricacies of how best can we operationalize these integration aspects of regulation of these informal people within the system. And we have studies that have come out. I don't know whether they are on the website yet, but we are planning workshops around that specific element within the countries. Thank you.
If I can add to that, I'm originally from Brazil, and I worked in financing projects in Brazil. One of the projects, many projects related to waste management. Maybe Mark has more information than I have, but Brazil, we have a high rate of recycling thanks to the market that was created. So these projects are, in Africa, it's really the beginning of the creation of this market. We don't have the structure, all the infrastructure needed, all the buyers, because waste collectors, they do just a first step and of the processing. They collect, and usually they press the waste, and just by doing that they double, or sometimes they multiply their income by 4 times. So then they can even go beyond, be more organized and process even more and multiply their income by 8 sometimes. So in Brazil we see already big cooperatives, and it's really interesting to see people that came out of the landfills, like the pictures that Peter showed, mainly women, and became leaders, and that discussed with politics, reinforced the waste management policy, and it changed all the context in waste management. So this is, I think, really the beginning of the project, and I think it's really good to start from local initiatives, because each context has a different network, a different way of working, different way, culture, and so ensure the adaptation of to the local context.
I'll add something, yeah, and then I'll stop. I'm French, I have to give my opinion everywhere I'm being asked. Just a short one. The most of sorry about this. Yeah, whatever. Most of the reason why the larger organizations are trying to work and reduce plastic, unfortunately, is because, not necessarily because they believe in it, but because they have to. The policies, the pressure from the public. And these are formalized reasons. So for them, it's very difficult to incorporate the informal sector, because it's harder to trace and link back to those obligations that they have towards the government or their customers, because it is informal. However, for a lot of that informal sector, in Latin America and in Africa, those people, the coastal communities in particular, they don't want to do it because it looks good. They need the good functioning of nature, ecosystem services. They need this for their survival. If you're a fisherman, you'll have to care about plastic, because otherwise you're jeopardizing the very asset that you rely upon. So they have a lot of solutions, and they're more and more, thanks to organizations like IUCN, WWF, CI, and TNC, finally and eventually trying to, being more heard, and more funding is going towards empowering those people, the capacity, and bringing up those frugal innovation to kind of this bottom-up approach eventually happening, which is great. And yes, I know we are out of time. Thanks, Janika.
With that, I'm going to close this session, and I thank, first of all, our panelists for providing their insight to what is an interesting topic. I'm sure we could have gone for longer, and thank you for staying with us, and join us later. Thank you.